This is Chapter 7 on political parties. First question is, what is a political party and how does it differ from an interest group? Well, I've listed here two sets of differences. The party on the one side is essentially an umbrella organization that seeks majority support from among the public. It tries to be a majority party in the country, that is, to have a majority of the people who live in the United States and vote, have them be part of its party. Now, neither one of the Democrats or Republicans has been able to do that for the last 50 years, but that's their goal. On the other hand, you have interest groups that are relatively small. Certainly, by comparisons, they're very small. And they consist of only a handful of people, like-minded people, who have the same stance on an issue. Like, for example, the American Medical Association is made up essentially of doctors, and they would constitute less than 1% of the population. So it'd be nothing like, in terms of numbers, nothing like a political party. The second thing is that the very ambitious goal of political parties is to control the government. That is, to dominate the president, Congress, and the Supreme Court, to have whoever's in the offices of the president, who's ever in the office of president, or who's ever the majority in Congress, or 5 members of the Supreme Court to be of their party. Whereas, and that, like I said, is very ambitious, but interest groups, on the other hand, attempt to just kind of influence the direction of policy. They don't really care who's in office. They just want to make sure that the policy that's passed that they care about, like gun control or medical, the way medicine is practiced in the United States, that those issues are handled in a way that benefit them. And the third thing is that the parties nominate candidates where they actually attempt to pick somebody to run for president or members of Congress or the Supreme Court. They have somebody they want to nominate, where, on the other hand, in comparison with that, interest groups either endorse candidates once they've been nominated if they got somebody who's close to their point of view on their issue. And as I've said before, they're involved in the financing of candidates and campaigns. Here's a definition that I picked off the internet of political parties. It's pretty common, you find in most textbooks. Only political parties nominate and run candidates for office under their label. So not only are they trying to nominate candidates, but they're trying to be involved in the conduct of the campaign as well. Another thing is that parties focus on a platform. If you pay attention to party conventions, when they're held every 4 years to nominate a presidential candidate, one of the things that they do is they are involved in a platform. That is, it's a whole set of issues that the party stands for. Again, this is pretty weak. It used to be stronger in the old days, but in our time it's much weaker because there's no obligation on the part of the candidates, either president on down, to support the platform. And oftentimes, too, the platforms don't really say anything. They're just platitudes about the issues rather than specific stands. They might have meant something in the old days, but they don't amount to much now. Political parties are quasi-public institutions that are accountable by state and local laws. One of the things that keeps the parties together or keeps them going is that they are recognized by the law. And that's pretty unique because interest groups are not, only in the sense that they're regulated, but they're not promoted like political parties are. Okay, the second one is, why are parties in decline? And there's a whole lot of reasons for that. For one thing, party identification is on the decline. More people are saying they're independents than saying they're Democrats or Republicans. Now, party identification comes from polling. When you go out and you ask people, what are you, a Democrat, a Republican, an independent, or what? And the numbers of people that say I'm a Democrat constitute the party and the electorate of the Democratic Party, and the people who say I'm a Republican constitute their counterpart, and that's what we call party identification. But what's going on is that the number of people who call themselves Democrats and Republicans is going down, and the number of people identifying themselves as independents is going up. So that's one indication that the parties are in decline. The second thing is that voters are not likely to vote a straight ticket anymore or support all candidates of one party. It's most voting today is split ticket voting. That is, people vote for some Democrats and then some Republicans. That stems from the fact that candidates run on their own now. You don't have that domination of the campaign process by the political parties like you once did. Back in the old days, if you say you go back to the time before television, what would go on would be that the parties would go out there and present their candidates as a ticket or a team or a group of people, and they would ask the voters to vote for them together. So they would want you to vote, say, for the presidential candidate all the way down to the bottom of the ticket. And that would if people did that, that would be called voting a straight ticket. But most people don't do that anymore, in large part because they're not asked to do it, but also because they think they know more about the candidates thanks to television and television ads and television appearances that candidates make during the campaign. So instead of voting a straight ticket, they vote a split ticket. Another thing, of course, that's weakened the parties is the primary system. We've moved from caucus, that is a small group of people making the choice, to convention, and eventually to primaries, where all the states have a primary system, that is an election to pick the nominee of the party. And as you move to allow more people to participate like that, you weaken the party. The party was strongest when it had a caucus, still strong but less strong when it had a convention, and then finally when it has a primary. The convention still exists. I should say something about that because I don't want to confuse anybody. The conventions still meet every 4 years, but they don't have the job of picking a candidate like they once did. Now that's done by the primary system. So by the time a convention comes around late in the summer, what's happening is that the candidate has already been chosen. Another thing that's weakened the parties is the decline of patronage and the replacement of it by a civil service system. Back in the days of, starting with the President Jackson all the way to the present, there's been some jobs that are controlled by the political parties. So, for example, a classic example would be a governor. If you get elected governor and you're a Democrat, then everybody who had a job working for the state, whether they were in some office in a bureaucracy or they were police or whatever they were replaced by the other party. So the Democrats would bring in all the rest of the Democrats to be in a bureaucracy with them, and the Republicans do the same. Corruption, ineffectiveness, a whole variety of things like that produced a civil service system where you don't have to be a member of a party and you can't be kicked out when the party changes from, or the main offices change from Democrat to Republican. Another reason for the decline of parties is that voters are becoming more informed, much more so, say, than if you look back to the 19th century. I know I said that people basically don't know what they're doing, and that's true, but they're better off today, way more college-educated people and so on. They're better off than they were, say, in the 19th century when very few people could even read. So that's made a difference, and as long as the electorate has more information, they're more likely not to want to be blindly voting for the Democrat because that person's a Democrat, or Republican because that person's a Republican. They want to make up their own mind. Radio, television, the internet, especially I would say television, has changed the way people look at candidates, and making individual voters think that they can make up their own minds. They don't need the parties to tell them what to do. The parties have ceased to operate using party platforms. They don't really, they have a platform, but it doesn't mean much anymore because they can't control who pays attention to it and who doesn't among the candidates. candidates are free to say whatever they want, and they oftentimes do that without any repercussions from the party. If you looked at other countries, like, say, a strong party system like in England, you could never get away with that. But here, the parties are weak and decentralized, and they don't have any way to make everybody go along with their platform. So those things are kind of ignored. And then the image of the parties, the perceived and actual corruption in the parties, and the political process is blamed on the parties. So corruption is blamed on them, whether they're responsible or not, and the end result is that their prestige is pretty low, and because they don't have a lot of status, they tend not to be uppermost in people's minds, and they certainly don't influence the vote very much. Number 3 is, what are the functions? And I listed here the primary functions and secondary functions. The primary functions are to recruit candidates, nominate the candidates, conduct election campaigns, and organize the government. Recruiting candidates means you go out and look for people. Now, that doesn't really happen much anymore, not in the 21st century, but back in the 20th century that was done. Whenever you had somebody who was really popular and they weren't political, like, for example, President Eisenhower back in 1952, he was sought after by both the Democrats and the Republicans, and he became a Republican, but he was heavily recruited by both sides. Nominating candidates, they do that to some degree, but not really very much anymore, because of the fact that you have the primary system replace the caucus and convention system. Conducting election campaigns, they used to do that before the age of television. They don't do it much anymore. Every candidate is really pretty much on their own to form not a party campaign, but a candidate campaign. And then the last one is organize the government, which is to try to overcome the differences between the President, Congress, and Supreme Court and try to get them to all act together. So if they're all members of the same party, they're most likely to operate in unison. So essentially what you could say about the functions is that they're not really performing these primary functions the way they once did. And as a result, they tend to be very weak. Here are some of the secondary functions, that is, what happens as a result of trying to perform the primary functions. Aggregation of demands, that is, they become like interest groups in that they represent certain stands on the issues. So you'll have like a Republican stand on abortion and a Democratic stand on abortion. Gun control, you might have the same kind of thing. So they're kind of, giving the public officials some indication of what the public wants when it comes to issue determination of what laws to pass. Conciliation of groups in a society. The second one has to do with diffusing dissent, diffusing possible conflict that might take place. Because the parties are umbrella organizations, they take in all kinds of different people and give them a sense of participation in the political system. So that kind of thing is a function of parties. So trying to be umbrella organizations mean they diffuse dissent. Staffing the government. The Democrats and Republicans are standing by whenever there's an appointment to be made of a cabinet position or Supreme Court judge or anything. They're standing around with a list of names of members of their party who they would want the president to choose. Coordination of government institutions. Again, that's overcoming separation of powers. That's what I meant when I said talking about organizing the government. Trying to get the whole government to be majority support of a political party. Promotion of political stability. Over time, we have conflict, and we settle it peacefully, whether that's in Congress or transfer of power from one party to the other in presidential elections. Those things are done peacefully, and in large part thanks to the political parties. Third parties provide a source of new ideas. They grab the ideas of third parties whenever they come along. The progressives back in the beginning of the 20th century had a whole bunch of ideas having to do with like 40-hour work week and 5-day work week and child labor and all kinds of laws like that having to do with work conditions in the United States. And those things were taken from the third party progressives and taken up by the Democrats and Republicans. So they'll do that. They'll co-opt the information or ideas if they're popular by third parties. Another one is to help make voters, help to make government accountable to voters, I should say. So essentially what that is they act much like the media does, where they try to make sure that the certain branches of the government are not abusing power. This is done when there's divided government, that is, one institution is controlled by the Democrats and the other is controlled by the Republicans. For example, when President Nixon was in the impeachment process, he resigned before he got impeached, but when he was involved in that impeachment process, it was the Democrats who were impeaching him. He was a Republican. That would never have happened if the Republicans were in control of the majority of the Congress. So that's when it happens. The same thing with President Clinton. It was the same way, only reversed in terms of the presidency. The president was a Democrat and the Congress, House and Senate were controlled by Republicans. And then the last one is to frame the issues. In the process of performing the primary functions, they frame the issues, telling us what the options are in any issue. What can we do? And when they say framing, it's framing because they're leaving something out. They're almost always leaving something out. So our options are usually larger, more extensive than what they're telling us. One example that I often give is like in wartime, when the president wants to go to war, he says that there's really no alternative. They have to go to war because the other side is made up of these lunatics that won't negotiate, that refuse to compromise and just want to kill us. I remember when President Bush said they hate us because we're free. They hate freedom, in other words. Like they're lunatics, they're crazies. So what happens? We go and fight, and after 10 or 12 or how many years we could stand it, then we sit down and negotiate with them and design a peace, much like we did in Vietnam. So, it's just framing the issues. They're very important in doing all that. So the last thing is explain why we have a two-party system in the United States. So here's some of the reasons. We have a winner-take-all system, meaning the losers don't get anything. It's called single-member districts. So only one winner, going from up the middle of the top toward the right. Only one winner. The loser gets nothing. And the strategy then to voters is don't waste your vote theory. So if a third party comes along, the Democrats and Republicans argue don't waste your vote. If you vote for a third party, it's not going anywhere, they're not going to win. And so the end result is going to be you just wasted your vote. Or they'll say if you vote for the third party, like for example, the Democrats would say about voting for Ralph Nader, that if you voted for him, that was really going to be a vote for the Republicans because he would be taking votes away from the Democrats. So that's the kind of thing, and people buy into that, and so that means that there's little or no support for the third parties, and very few of them are able to survive. And then the last thing is up here in the left-hand top, existing parties make rules to perpetuate their power. So the laws, and I mentioned that before, that part of the definition of political party is that it is involved in the laws. The laws that are made by Democrats and Republicans, and they make them to favor the Democrats and the Republicans and to disfavor third parties. Here's some other reasons. The history and culture, we've all had a two-party system throughout the history of the United States, and people just don't trust third parties. They feel funny voting for a third party. There's a sense that who are these guys? What are they about? And confusion about third parties. Some other more important reasons would be electoral college. You have to have strong support throughout the country. It can't just be majority of the people. It has to be strong support in a geographical sense. And third parties rarely have that. Usually they're concentrated in a few states, and you can't win that way. You got to win in the electoral college. Just winning the majority vote is not going to do it for you. Um, in the election of President Bush versus Gore, Gore won the popular vote. That is, he won a majority of the people of the United States, but he didn't get it in the right geographical areas, according to that's a final Supreme Court decision that gave Bush Florida, and so he didn't win. And that's a tremendous obstacle for third parties, and suggests why we have a two-party system. Federalism is another reason. Federalism means parties have to have some strength at the state level and at the local level as well as the national. And again, like the electoral college, that usually doesn't happen. Third parties are usually some kind of weak organization at the national level, but non-existent at the state or local level. State gerrymandering is a way of making laws that benefit the Democrats and Republicans. It's drawing up the districts, and the districts are drawn by the state legislatures, and those are dominated by Democrats and Republicans, and they always favor themselves. They favor the two parties. And then the last thing is a co-optation of major ideas of third parties. I talked about that already, that whenever the third party has a good idea, the Democrats or Republicans will take it up.